A lost file, a secret Watson never meant to share. Welcome to Fog Casebook. I am your host, Vela. Tell me where you're listening from. Your insight completes this case. Now let's uncover the forgotten truth. It was in the raw dimness of an October morning that I first found the name which, like a burr, clung to my conscience. The coal scuttle was low, the grate sullen, and a yellow smear of London light pressed upon our window, when I set myself to the humble labour of restoring order to my medical notebooks. I had been prevailed upon by Mrs. Hudson to remove that medical graveyard, as she termed the tottering stack beside our sitting-room cabinet, and thus I sat with my back to the fire, turning leaves that smelt faintly of carbolic and dust. Holmes, gaunt and grey-eyed, lay upon the sofa, with his lank figure articulating the cushions like the bones of a long fish. A violin lay mute upon the chair-arm, an untasted coffee grew cold upon the mantel, where a smear of soot formed a grotesque moustache beneath the mantel clock. He watched me, as was his custom, with a droll indulgence that never quite concealed the curiosity within. "You betray yourself, Watson," said he at length, without raising his head. "The year is 1889, your patient is a clerk, the pain is acute, left side, and you sent him away with a tincture, not a knife." I looked up, my hand upon the very page which had so disturbed me. "Holmes, you have glanced over my shoulder. My dear fellow, the shadow on your cuff tells me you have turned 3 leaves with the right thumb, always your habit when you compare entries, and the smudge of wintergreen upon your forefinger is of a kind given by a particular liniment in which you are over-fond of adding a dram more than is fashionable. The ribbon you have worried between your teeth, observe its frayed end, belongs to your notebook for the year after our return from the continent. As for the rest, well, you muttered "clerk" under your breath, and twice tapped your ribs at the 5th intercostal space. Believe me, I need not trespass upon your privacy when you make your own announcements with such zeal. "You are incorrigible," said I, though I could not forbear from smiling, but if I muttered, it was not from habit. I confess I am unsettled, Holmes. "That your conscience is touched is plain," he returned, lifting his gaze to the ceiling. "You have the expression of a man who finds his own signature in a place he ought never to have been." I started, and the notebook slid upon my knee. Come, he drawled. "The hand is yours, but the memory is not. That is an ill marriage in any parish." "You are devilish!" I cried. "It is precisely that. See here." I laid the open volume upon the table and pointed to an entry in my old, neat hand. "March 17th, 1889, Mr. Albert Downing, clerk, Chancery Lane. Severe pleuritic pain aggravated by exertion. House call at 9:15 of the clock. Prescribed tinct, GT to be taken thrice daily. Signed, J.H.W., M.D. "Perfectly ordinary," said Holmes with a yawn. "Ordinary save for this, Holmes. On the evening of March the 17th, I was not in London. I spent those 2 days in Southsea with an old army companion, Captain Murray. I have his letter and my return ticket somewhere in the other stack. Yet here is my hand, my initials, and the most exactitude." Holmes rose in a single elastic motion and came to the table. He did not sit, but bent as the naturalist bends above a rare beetle. "You are certain of Southsea?" "As certain as of my own name." "Downing!" He tried the sound upon his tongue. "Albert Downing, Chancery Lane, on St. Patrick's Day, no less." He lifted the page by its corners, sniffed, and smiled thinly. "You see, Mr. Downing is precise too. The entry was penned with a steel nib of the falcon pattern, cheap and common, but your hand is altered by haste, and the downstroke upon the D indicates a pause. Here, that is not like you. You sign fluidly, not as a man who considers, but as one who confirms. I confess I felt a cold, creeping sensation. If this is forgery, it is a clever one. Clever forgery is the only kind that pays, said Holmes, yet I do not cry forgery so soon. Paper, ink, pressure, these will sing if one has the ear, and the ear of London is soon at our door. As if conjured by his words, there came a brisk rap, 2 short and 1 long, characteristic of our frequent visitor. Holmes's eyes brightened. "Lestrade," said he. "He carries a light cane today, not his heavier malacca. There is urgency without weight." Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard entered with his usual air of severe propriety. He bowed to me, nodded to Holmes, and perched upon the edge of a chair, as if duty itself had only granted him half the cushion. "Good morning, Mr. Holmes, Doctor. I shall be brief. There is a matter which touches the Yard, and I fear yourself, Dr. Watson." Indeed, I felt the same chill upon my spine. Lestrade drew forth a folded sheet and a small card-backed memorandum. "You have heard of the Chancery Lane fraud? Perhaps not. It is a dull affair to the press. Ledgers, trust accounts, figures that mean little to the public. But yesterday, one of the partners of Messrs. Whitmore and Hale was murdered, stabbed in his office sometime between 9 and 10 of the clock. The junior clerk, one Albert Downing, is under arrest." Holmes exchanged a shielded glance with me. "Downing protests an alibi," Lestrade continued. "He declares that at 9:15 he was under a physician's care for a sudden seizure, a pain in the ribs, at his lodgings in Holborn. He produces this." Lestrade laid the card-backed slip upon our table. It was a visiting record, the sort kept by certain practitioners for house calls. Date, hour, ailment, signature. The name appended was mine. "March 17th, murmured Holmes. "You are late by years, Lestrade." "It is not the murder which desires your name, Mr. Holmes," returned the inspector stiffly, "but the fraud. The dead partner kept a private schedule of disbursements. For the critical evening in that schedule, the very night upon which several false entries were effected, this old record of Dr. Watson's is invoked. Downing says he has once been attended by the doctor, and that the pains recur. That he fetches out this card, kept as proof of how such episodes fell upon him, and that the Times stands witness that he could not have been at Whitmore and Hale when the money was moved. The Yard, being men of sense," he glanced, half apologetically, at Holmes, "wished naturally to verify the good doctor's signature, which brings me to you." "Downing," said I, with a dryness of mouth, "is a name from my very notebook, but I was not in London that evening." Lestrade's eyes widened a fraction. "Not in London, but the signature is ambiguous," said Holmes crisply. "Leave the slip, the circumstances, and the man to me. In return, you shall have the culprit, or, failing that, the truth that frees your mind of this pretty entanglement." The inspector, used as he was to Holmes's arrogance, allowed himself a thin smile. "I shall not quarrel with success before I see it, Mr. Holmes." Yet there is more. We searched Downing's rooms. In a drawer we found a packet of blotting papers, some with impressions of accounts, ordinary enough, and one with the ghost of a line that I am told is Irish. "And ribe too, Aganteach? Does that signify anything?" Holmes's eyes sparked. "It signifies St. Patrick's Day again, and a man who takes his amusements from a different quarter than his ledgers would suggest. You may go, Lestrade. I would see Downing, and I would see Whitmore and Hale. Have the courtesy to request the clerk's lodging address and the office's location sent to Baker Street within the hour. There is also a small errand. From your evidence room, I desire the blotter in a closed wrapper, the precise pen with which this card was signed, and the ash that lay upon Downing's hearth, if any remained." "You expect ash?" Lestrade asked. I expect everything, Holmes returned serenely, except the truth to be obvious at first glance. When the inspector had departed, his footsteps pattering down our stairs like a brisk metronome, Holmes set the visiting card beside my notebook. With the lightest of touch, he brought the two together upon the mirror top of our mantel, then lifted them apart. Faint, reversed, in mirrored script, a remnant of ink had transferred from card to glass. Holmes squinted, then held the mantel lamp nearer. Observe, Watson, the cross of your T in Watson is not in your habit at all. It is heavier at the left than the right. When fatigue presses you, your crossbar droops. Here, the hand is fresh. Now, your notebook, March 17th. Here the T is yours, but the haste is foreign. Two hands, one intention. Holmes, I cried, what intention? To place you where you were not, he said softly, and to pluck from your reputation the iron nail that fastens another man's alibi to the wall. He moved to the window and drew back the curtain with a finger. Outside, the river fog drove past Baker Street in slow, pale battalions. A costermonger's cry rose and fell. Somewhere, a church bell groped for the hour. Ireland in the blotter, mused Holmes, St. Patrick in the date, a clerk with a taste for the Gaelic tongue and the good fortune to find in our sentimental London a doctor whose neat hand is better known than his engagements. My dear Watson, in a city of millions, there are only a few who know precisely when you were out of town. Who are they? Your old army friends, Mrs. Hudson, who keeps our comings and goings with her saucepan, and a certain breed of man who collects other men's movements as a spider gathers flies. Holmes! Call them what you like. Record-keepers, informers, janitors of paper. They live by the hinge and the ledger. If your forgotten file is not forgotten at all, it has been remembered by one of these. He turned, all languor fallen from him. The hawk had awakened in the dove. Your South Sea ticket, he said. Find it, your friend Murray's letter, the postmark, the train times. Meanwhile, I shall call upon Whitmore and Hale, and later upon Mr. Downing's hearth. There is a smell to this, my dear fellow, a trifling scent of oil of wintergreen, a suggestion of cheap steel nibs and the faintest ash of Trichinopoly tobacco. It is a bouquet that suggests not murder merely, but accountancy. Accountancy? I echoed. Accounts, said Holmes with a cold smile, are the only murders which begin years before the victim dies. Dress warmly, Watson. London keeps its secrets best when it is cold. With that he clapped his hat upon his head, caught up his cane, and without a further word, glided down the stairs. Left alone, I turned back to the wavering lines of my own hand, to the neat initials which ought to have fixed a memory, and instead dissolved it, and I felt, as any honest man would, the unease of seeing his character enlisted in a war he had not joined. I had scarcely found Captain Murray's letter, postmarked Southsea, March 16th, when the bell rang again. This time it was not Lestrade, but a lady, veiled and tremulous, who pressed a gloved hand to her breast and asked, in a voice that quivered between hope and terror, "Is Mr. Sherlock Holmes within? For I fear that something I mislaid long ago has returned to destroy me." I ushered the lady into our sitting-room and placed her in the armchair nearest the fire. She was slight and well-made, her dress sober, but of fine cloth, and though the veil hid her features, I noted that her hands, when she removed her gloves, were of the kind one sometimes sees among those accustomed to pen and ledger, narrow, dexterous, with a faint discoloration upon the middle finger where a steel nib rests. The tremor that had vibrated through her voice was not theatrical. Indeed, she sat with the poise of one who has husbanded her courage for a single errand, and now, having reached it, fears the cost of speaking. "Pray be calm," said I. "Mr. Holmes is momentarily abroad on a matter that may touch your business nearer than you suppose. I am his friend, Dr. Watson. If you will entrust me with the outline, I shall convey it to him at once." She breathed once, deeply, and I heard the veil rasp as it lifted from her mouth. "I am Miss Clara Whitmore," said she. "My uncle was Mr. Arthur Whitmore, of Whitmore and Hale, Chancery Lane. He was killed last night. There is much that the police do not know, and something I have concealed. I had not the courage for the Yard, but I have heard of Mr. Holmes." I confess that the name struck me with a sudden chill. "Then, Miss Whitmore, you will understand that anything you tell me is sacred. You say there is something concealed?" She clasped her hands together so that the knuckles whitened. 2 months ago I mislaid, or as I then believed, lost, a small leather folder from my desk at the office. It contained a list of names and dates my uncle had me copy under his dictation. He told me it was merely a reconciliation of petty cash, and ordered me to place it in his private safe. I confess I kept it in my drawer for an hour, thinking to copy the penmanship again for practice. Before I did so, it was gone. I searched everywhere. I said nothing for fear of appearing negligent. 2 days later, the folder was returned to my drawer as mysteriously as it had vanished, but with one line altered. I am certain of it, for my own hand was there like a mirror. "In what way altered?" "A date," she said. "The 17th of March. What had been the 18th in my copy was made the 17th, and the initial beside it, which I had made an H for Mr. Hale, was forced into a W. The change was delicate, clever, but I had kept a rougher draft in my reticule, and when I compared them at home, I saw my uncle was a strict man. If I had confessed my error, or the theft, he would have dismissed me. I resolved to watch instead. There were other things, a strange Irish phrase written idly upon a blotter, a set of accounts that balanced too sweetly, and a junior clerk, Albert Downing, who was always at my desk with excuses. "You believe Downing took the folder?" "I do not know what to believe," she murmured. "Mr. Downing had the manner of a nervous boy. Yet I have seen such boys become men of iron when they hold a chain that others cannot see." "You see, Miss Whitmore," said I gently, "the very date that was altered is now used by Downing for an alibi, and my name, worse luck, has been drawn into it. It may be that the theft of your folder and the manufacture of my signature were links in one design." She bent her head. "Then my silence was a part of the rope." "Not so," I returned. "Caution in a house where one cannot be sure whom to trust is no sin, but prudence. Tell me, when you discovered the return of the folder, did you keep it?" "No, I returned it to my uncle's safe that very morning. He alone had the key until the last fortnight, when he entrusted a duplicate to Mr. Hale because of certain late hours. But there is one thing more. Last night, an hour before my uncle was killed, I received a note at our lodgings in Bloomsbury. It contained no signature, only the line, "What is lost returns in due season. Keep your head and your hands from ink tonight." There was a smear upon the paper that smelt of wintergreen. I started. The coincidence was too close to be ignored. "The caution was strange. You obeyed it?" "Yes, I did not go to the office, though I had intended to carry Mr. Whitmore some memoranda. When I learned of his death, I resolved to bring the note to Mr. Holmes. Here it is." She drew from her reticule a half-sheet. The hand was a neat, upright clerk's, but the formation of the R in returns possessed a curious spur at the base, an unlovely affectation I had seen in only a few hands. The wintergreen was unmistakable. I had scarcely resolved to detain her until Holmes returned, when I heard his quick step upon the stair. He entered with that brightness of eye which told me that some small piece had already fallen into its place, "Ah," said he in that sudden grave courtesy which he reserved for women in distress. "Miss Whitmore, I think. You have saved me a journey." His gaze flickered once to her hands, to the half-sheet, and to the small black mark upon the wrist where her glove had pinched the skin. "Doctor, you have made her comfortable. Excellent. We are very near the heart of this." He read the note, held it to the light, and then, to my surprise, touched the corner to the flame of the lamp. The paper browned, and along the margin appeared a faint lattice of lines. "Ruled by a ledger," he observed, extinguishing the singe. "Our correspondent writes upon a book laid beneath. The spacing is by habit, not by chance. And here, do you smell it? Wintergreen, yes, but also a ghost of trichinopoly. The writer keeps poor company." Miss Whitmore had lifted her veil. She was pale, intelligent, and struggling bravely against fear. Holmes, with delicate sympathy, set the paper aside and drew a chair nearer. "I shall be plain, Miss Whitmore. Your uncle and Mr. Hale have for months past suffered a small leak in their ship. It is managed not by a thief of bold strokes, but by a clerk of minute ones, an artist in increments. To such a man, an alibi is his anchor. He will lay it years beforehand if he can. Your vanished folder, your returned folder with the one date altered, and our good Watson's conjured visit form the triple knot. Downing is convenient, perhaps guilty, perhaps a screen, but the hand that tied the string is older than his." Her lips parted. "Mr. Hale?" Holmes's look was unreadable. "Mr. Hale is a man of smooth balance sheets and late hours. I have just left the office. There is a waste-paper basket there that does not belong to the room. A cheap thing brought down from a junior's desk. In its wicker I found ash, not of office cigars, but of the stronger Indian leaf, trichinopoly. Your uncle did not smoke at all. Mr. Hale affects Havanas. Downing, I suspect, smokes nothing but his own nerves. Who, then, smokes trichinopoly in a lawyer's office?" "An outsider," I suggested. "A visitor who is no visitor," said Holmes. "A man attached to no single room, who has the key to many, perhaps all, the rooms where the city's paper breathes. Janitors of paper, Watson, porters, cleaners, yes, but above all the species I mentioned, record-keepers of the underworld. There is one I know by repute who haunts Chancery Lane, Irish by birth, a collector of odd phrases and a lover of cheap pens. He would put a line in Gaelic upon a blotter for the pleasure of it. He is the sort of spider who sits between the ledgers and listens." Miss Whitmore had risen, the colour returning faintly to her cheeks. "If that man exists, can you find him?" "I shall," said Holmes, "but first I must see Downing and the safe, and I must borrow from you a thing you will not wish to lend." "What is that, Mr. Holmes?" "Your handwriting," he said with a little bow. "In particular, your method of turning an H into a W when you are afraid." She stared. Then, with a gallant steadiness, she seated herself and took the pen I offered. While she bent to the page, Holmes's hand found my sleeve. "Do you see, Watson?" he whispered. "The fraud is the root, the murder, the pruning." They cut off Whitmore because he was about to see what his own niece had seen. "But the gardener's hand is not Downing's. We go to Holborn and then to a cellar off Chancery Lane, where ledgers grow mould. Bring your revolver, they will not love the light." Holmes insisted we waste no time, and soon we were rattling eastward in a hansom toward Holborn. Miss Whitmore, though pale, insisted upon accompanying us. Holmes had agreed, for he declared that her presence might shake something loose from the reticent clerk we were to confront. She sat opposite us, her hands clasped tightly about her reticule, her eyes lowered, but her ears plainly attentive to every word. Holmes, meanwhile, leaned forward with his long fingers steepled, the brim of his hat drawn low so that only the sharp gleam of his eyes caught the occasional gaslight. "You will find, Watson," he murmured, "that the criminal in this affair is not a creature of impulse but of foresight. Such men do not merely react, they arrange. A false date here, a forged visit there, these are the paving stones of his escape. But when Whitmore, stern and scrupulous, discovered the neat accounting trick, the path became blocked. Then came the knife." "And Downing?" I asked. "Downing," said Holmes, "is either the dull pawn or the too clever accomplice. We shall see which within the hour." The cab drew up before a dreary row of lodgings, and we climbed the narrow stairs to a third-floor chamber. Lestrade awaited us there with his usual air of suppressed impatience. He rose as Holmes entered, giving a brief nod to Miss Whitmore before turning his attention back to the room's single occupant. Albert Downing sat by the small iron bedstead, his hands twisting one another with nervous energy. He was a thin fellow, pale and clean-shaven, scarcely more than 25. His eyes darted between us wide and hunted, as though each visitor carried a warrant in his pocket. "Well, Mr. Holmes," said Lestrade brusquely, "you may try your hand with him, though I doubt you'll hear more than I have. He protests innocence, claims his alibi, and clings to that slip signed by our good doctor here." Holmes gave Downing a bow of almost exaggerated courtesy. "Mr. Downing, you are in an unfortunate situation. A partner of your firm is murdered, suspicion falls upon you, and your only refuge is an alibi which rests upon the good Dr. Watson's name. Yet Dr. Watson swears he was nowhere near you on the night in question. That is a grave contradiction." Downing swallowed hard, his lips trembling. I never forged it, sir. I never did. It was in my drawer, and I only kept it to show when the pains returned. I thought it would serve. It is true I saw the doctor years ago when first I came to London. I swear it on my soul." Miss Whitmore stepped forward, her voice cutting clear through his babble. "Albert, you took my folder. Do not deny it." "You hovered about my desk, and 2 days after it vanished, it returned with the date changed. Who gave it to you?" His eyes widened, and for a moment he looked like a child caught in a lie. He shook his head furiously. "I did not, Miss Clara. I never touched your folder. I swear I never meant harm. But there is a man. He spoke to me often, in the passage, late at night, when I carried papers. He knew things. He said he could smooth my way if I would listen. I thought he was only friendly." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Describe him." "A short man, broad-shouldered, with black hair greying at the temples. He had a way of speaking, half English, half Irish, and he always smelt of some strong scent. Wintergreen, perhaps, or tobacco. He called himself Rafferty." Holmes's lips curled in a thin smile. "So the spider shows a leg, this Rafferty. Did he not also give you the slip with Dr. Watson's name?" Downing's hands knotted tighter. "He said I might need it if ever I were questioned. He pressed it on me. I kept it. God forgive me, I thought it would shield me. I never struck Mr. Whitmore. I never raised a hand against him." Holmes straightened, turning to Lestrade. "You hear? The man we must seek is not this trembling clerk, but the collector of files, the janitor of secrets, this Rafferty. Downing is weak, yes, but weakness is not murder. Tell me, Lestrade, will you find the true quarry, or will you content yourself with the bait?" Lestrade's expression soured, but he knew better than to dismiss Holmes's instinct outright. "If Rafferty exists, we shall find him," he said grudgingly. But the blood was on Downing's hands in the yard's eyes. "Blood," murmured Holmes, "and yet no knife was found. Convenient, is it not, that a timid clerk should kill with so bold a stroke, and yet dispose of the weapon as cleanly as a veteran cut-purse? No, Inspector. The hand that killed was practised, and the hand that practised belongs to Rafferty. or to one he serves. Miss Whitmore had watched the exchange with rising colour. She now stepped to Downing's side, her voice soft but steady. "Albert, if you are innocent, help us. What else did Rafferty ask of you?" He looked at her miserably, then dropped his face into his hands. His words came muffled but clear enough. "He asked only that I leave drawers unlocked, that I carry papers when told, and that I never question. I was afraid to refuse. He knew things of me, small foolish things I had done as a boy. He said he could ruin me. I thought better to obey." Holmes bent swiftly, raising Downing's chin with a long finger so that the young man met his piercing gaze. "Courage now. Did Rafferty ever mention Mr. Hale?" Downing shivered. "Yes. He said Mr. Hale was a man who knew which way the river flowed. He said Mr. Whitmore was a stone in the stream, and stones must be moved. That was all." Holmes let him go, his expression grave. "So Hale is the stream, Whitmore the stone, and Rafferty the hand that shifts it. The picture becomes clearer." He turned sharply to Lestrade. "Guard this man well, but do not condemn him. The true criminal walks free in Chancery Lane. Tonight, Watson, Miss Whitmore, we pay Mr. Hale a visit, unannounced. There is something in his waste-paper basket that deserves a second glance, and perhaps a certain spider will scuttle into sight if the web is touched." As we descended the lodging-house stairs, the fog pressed close against the windows like damp wool. Holmes paused at the threshold, his face set with that peculiar fire which burned whenever he scented the heart of a mystery. "Watson," he said quietly, "bring your revolver. There are ledgers in this city written in ink that will never dry, and men who will kill rather than let us read them. Tonight we must turn a page that has long been folded shut." The fog had thickened to a tangible substance by the time we reached Chancery Lane, clinging to the street lamps and trailing like unspun wool from the iron railings. Holmes dismissed the cab and led us on foot along the pavement, Miss Whitmore close by my side. The firm of Whitmore and Hale loomed ahead, its pallid frontage and brass plate lending it the virtue of sober respectability. A night porter kept his vigil within a narrow glass box just inside the vestibule. Holmes's knock, 2 brisk taps and a pause, brought the man to the door with the air of one prepared to deny entry upon principle. Holmes forestalled objection with a rattle of legal phrases. He had, when it suited him, a solicitor's intonation, and produced Lestrade's folded note of introduction. The porter read it, frowned, and yielded with a stiff bow. 10 minutes only, sir, and no drawers to be opened," he said. "A man was killed here last night. There's to be no rummaging." "Rummaging?" Holmes repeated mildly. "My good fellow, if I rummage you shall know it. Tonight I merely observe." We passed through the tiled corridor into the shared outer office, where 2 clerks' desks faced a glass partitioned inner room bearing the name of Mr. Hale. The gas was turned low. The place smelled of dust, ink, and the faint tang of damp cloth. Holmes did not go first to the partner's door, as I had expected. Instead, he sank to one knee by the skirting board beneath the glass, and blew once upon the wood, then drew his finger along the moulding, and held it to the light. "You see it, Watson? A line of fine grit where none should be. The board has been lifted and replaced within a day. See the newer dust's paler hue." He traced a square, then pressed lightly so that the board sprang with a soft complaint. From the pocket of his coat he drew a slender blade and eased the panel outward. "No rummaging," he murmured, and slipped 2 fingers into the cavity. They returned with a few fibrous threads and a clipped corner of ledger paper scored with the ghost of ruled lines. Miss Whitmore leaned forward, her breath catching. Holmes sniffed it, touched it to his tongue, and nodded. Starch and wintergreen, our spider nests even in the skirting. The porter, who had edged nearer with the trepidation of a man watching a conjuring trick, began to protest. Holmes rose at once, dusting his knees. "There is nothing here now," he said, "but its absence is eloquent." Mr. Hale's door wore a new keyhole escutcheon, the brass too bright for the furniture about it. Inside, the room was orderly to the point of barrenness, a flat mahogany desk, a locked tin box upon the top, a waste-paper basket in wicker, and along the wall a small iron safe with a stout handle and dial. Holmes's first act was to pause upon the threshold, eyes half-lidded, head a fraction to one side, taking in the theatre as a whole, before a single prop. He stepped to the desk and examined the blotter, then the pen tray. "Falcon nibs," he said without inflection. "Half a dozen, but the pen that wrote Hale's last note is not here. The dried ink upon this quill is of a different cut. He keeps a private instrument elsewhere, perhaps his pocket. Miss Whitmore, pray direct your mind backward. Did your uncle ever complain of draughts in this room?" She shook her head. He disliked open windows. "Yet observe," Holmes went on, crossing to the sash. He lifted it a hand's breadth. The outer sill was faintly nicked, and upon the paint a smear that looked in that light like the memory of a thumb. He took out his lens. "Not a thumb," he said softly. "The flattened end of a wire, and here a fleck of black grease. The window, then, is a second door." We had not long to wait for the owner of the office. The latch turned, and Mr. Hale stood before us, his grave features composed, his chin smooth, his cuffs immaculate. He was a man of middle years, with that assured quiet which attends a life lived among paper victories. His gaze flicked from Miss Whitmore to me, and lingered a fraction too long upon Holmes. "I was not told of another inspection," he said. "Inspector Lestrade's men were here an hour ago." "We are not Lestrade's men," Holmes returned, with an air at once courteous and indifferent. "Sherlock Holmes, at your service. We have intruded because time, like money, compounds interest when not attended to. Your partner is dead, your junior clerk stands accused, and there is a certain gentleman named Rafferty who possesses the run of your premises." At that name a narrowing passed over Hale's eyes, the subtlest shift, and was gone. "Rafferty?" he said. "I do not know the person." Holmes sighed almost tenderly. "In that case he is a phantom who smokes trichinopoly and amuses himself by writing Gaelic proverbs on office blotters. The city is rich in such spirits." Hale made a small, precise gesture to the porter, who had followed us in. "Hobbs, remain at your post." He closed the door and faced us with a calm that I could not but admire. "Mr. Holmes," he said evenly, "your reputation is such that I must indulge your methods, though I fail to see their justice. I can tell you what I told the police. Mr. Whitmore and I worked late. I left at 9:15 to dine with a client. When I returned, some time after 10, the office was in disorder and Mr. Whitmore was gone. They found him in the records room. I know nothing of this Rafferty." "Your alibi will, of course, be examined," Holmes replied. "Whom did you dine with?" "Mr. Percival Larch of Larch and Blythe." "We were at Gatti's in the Strand." "The waiters know me?" Holmes nodded as if the matter bored him. "So do cellar rats know the man who tips them," he murmured. "Tell me, Mr. Hale, who holds the duplicate key to the safe?" "I do," Hale said after the smallest pause. "Mr. Whitmore had the primary, only we two." "And yet," Holmes mused, stepping to the safe and laying his ear to its flank as a physician to a chest, Someone has caressed this metal with an oiled cloth to wipe away the honest fingerprints of labour. There is a cleanliness that is guilt's cousin. He straightened. No matter. I shall not ask you to open it. The truth resides elsewhere. At that moment a faint scuff sounded in the corridor beyond, followed by the softest creak from the records room down the hall. Miss Whitmore started. Hale's gaze slid toward the door and then returned, too carefully, to Holmes's face. Holmes's own expression did not change, but his eyes brightened as a pointer's when it scents game. "You will forgive me," he said, and moved past Hale into the corridor with the noiseless speed of a cat. We followed. The records room door was ajar. Within, the tall shelves rose like ranks of sentries, their bellies fat with bound ledgers. The gas jet burned low, and from somewhere in the dimness came the almost imperceptible rasp of paper upon paper. Holmes lifted a hand for silence. He indicated that Miss Whitmore should remain by the door, and he and I advanced between the shelves, my fingers tight upon the butt of my revolver. We found him near the back wall, a squat figure in a brown coat, shoulders like a dockworker's, his hair black with a frost at the temples. He was kneeling before a lower shelf with a ledger half drawn, his head cocked toward us like an animal's. His right hand held a cheap steel pen. His left, I noticed, bore a nick across the knuckle. A tremulous smile flickered over his face, revealing a gold tooth. "Ah, now," he said, the vowels wrapped in Dublin. "And will it be the master himself?" Holmes's voice, when it came, was as cool as a scalpel. "Good evening, Mr. Rafferty. Pray finish your entry. We shall not interrupt genius." The man gave a little bow from his knees. "Sure, there's no genius in moving a figure from here to there when the river asks it. The ledgers are like maps. One alters the course, and the boats arrive where they're wanted." "At Whitmore's Heart, for example," Holmes said. "Stand, if you please." Rafferty rose with a smoothness that was nearly graceful for so compact a frame. I stepped nearer, revolver ready. He smelled unmistakably of wintergreen and the dark, bitter leaf of trichinopoly. Holmes regarded him with open curiosity. "Your trade, Mr. Rafferty?" "A little of everything," he replied. "I sweep some, I fetch some, I carry some, and I remember a deal more than I should. There's men with fine cuffs who like a man with dirty hands to do their clean work." "And they're killing?" Holmes asked softly. The smile thinned. "I'm no knife man, sir. I'd as soon carve my own belly. But a door opened here, a lock turned there. Who can say what rushes? Through when the city's wind gets up?" "Name the wind," said Holmes. "You will save yourself a season in hell." For the first time, a shadow crossed Rafferty's face. His eyes flicked past us, perhaps to the corridor, perhaps to the safe. Then he shrugged with a bravado that did not convince his voice. "I've no names at all, only ledgers. They tell their own stories." Holmes did not press him. He stooped and pinched a pinch of ash from the floor, black against the pale dust where the ledgers had been moved often. "Our friend smokes where he works," he murmured to me, "and the ash is oldest here at the rear stacks. He has kept this burrow for months." Aloud he said, "You will come with us, Mr. Rafferty. Inspector Lestrade shall be delighted." Rafferty's golden tooth flashed once more. "Ah, the yard. They like a spider when he sits in the centre, and not on their boots." Then, with a movement so swift it startled me, he hurled the ledger straight at my head, snatched the gas key, and plunged us into darkness. For an instant all was confusion, the slap of paper, Miss Whitmore's cry at the door, a scudding of boots. Then Holmes's hand closed upon my sleeve and dragged me bodily sideways. "Down!" he breathed. Something whirred where my skull had been. A wire, flung blind, cut the air, and struck the shelf with a vicious twang. I heard the scamper of Rafferty's feet and the far-off rattle of the sash. Holmes was up and racing before sense had fully returned to me. I stumbled after him into the corridor and reached the window in time to see a shadow drop to the outer sill, swing by a knotted cord, and vanish into the fog. Holmes leaned out, judged the distance, and drew back with a soft exclamation of impatience. "He has the wire we saw marks of," he said. "He has done this nightly until the city's breath is his accomplice. No matter, he has left more than he thinks." He picked from the inner sill a smear of grease and a fragment of dark fibre, which he folded into his handkerchief with the same care he might have bestowed upon a butterfly's wing. Then he turned to Miss Whitmore, who had steadied herself bravely, and to Mr. Hale, who had appeared behind her with a face of sober indignation remarkably free of surprise. "Mr. Hale," said Holmes, "your phantom is flesh and blood, and his web is spun through your house. Tomorrow morning I shall require your presence at Baker Street with your duplicate key, your personal account book, and your cuff-links from last evening. If you are innocent, you will come gladly. If you are not, the yard will bring you. For tonight, lock this window and pray that fog only hides men. It does not absolve them." Morning found Baker Street with a crisp, unwelcoming clarity, the kind that pairs shadows to their edges and leaves a man nowhere to hide. Mrs. Hudson's kettle chirped its little indignation at the draught, while Holmes, in shirt-sleeves, bent over the chemical table with a care that would have become a jeweller. The fragment from the window-sill and the smear wrapped in his handkerchief had become the morning's sermon. He warmed the grease, treated the fibre with reagents, and, with a satisfied huff that sprang from him like a spark, beckoned me to the bench. "Note the sheen, Watson, not tar, as our docs might suggest, but a mixture of tallow and glycerin. And the fibre, do you see the flattened, banded structure? Not hemp alone. It is a braid of hemp and horsehair, the very thing preferred by those who rig window lines to hold fast, without squeal, against paint. Such cord is sold cheaply by a certain ironmonger in Tooke's Court who outfits office porters. Our Mr. Rafferty is a creature of habit. He buys where his tribe buys." Before I could reply, Lestrade was shown up, bringing with him the damp odour of the yard and a bundle under his arm. He looked harassed and unshaven. "We had a lively dawn," said he, dropping into a chair with more weight than his frame might have suggested. "Someone tried to burn the outer ledger's room at Whitmore and Hale, a bottle with paraffin rags through the broken fanlight. Night porter doused it smartly, but the air's foul, and 2 shelves are scorched. If you wished for your spider's web intact, you are a few threads poorer." Holmes's eyes narrowed, their brightness moderated by the news rather than dimmed. "Arson is the coward's amendment to murder. Did you set a man to watch Mr. Hale's house?" "We did. He left at 8 to come here. He's below." "And Downing?" "In the cells," Lestrade returned. "Sullen, frightened. Says he heard a man humming Gary Owen when he was brought down the corridor at midnight. Nonsense, likely. There were arrest drunks nearby." Holmes's face took on that peculiar stillness which in him presaged movement. "Not nonsense. Our Irish friend is musical. Show Mr. Hale in." Hale entered with a kind of deliberate composure, carrying a leather account book and a small case. He bowed to Miss Whitmore, who, by Holmes's request, had arrived moments earlier with her courage tied up in a plain bonnet, and to me with the faintest trace of strain at the corners of his mouth. "I have what you asked," said he, setting the account-book upon the table. From the case he produced a pair of gold cuff-links, each bearing a milled edge and an inset of onyx. "I beg you to be brief. My firm bleeds client confidence until we are seen to be steady again." Holmes did not take the cufflinks at once. He circled the table as if they were a timid animal likely to bolt, then, with a folded paper, touched the onyx face of one and held the paper to the light. A faint oval transferred, smudged with a dull sheen. "Tallow and glycerine," said he. "Mr. Hale, your sleeve did business last night with a cord such as this." He held up the treated fibre on a glass slide, its dark strands gleaming like a violin string. "Will you tell us you were not at the records room window?" Hale's smile did not alter. Only his nostrils flared the tiniest degree. "If your art can make my cufflinks walk, Mr. Holmes, then they have more liberty than their owner. I dined where I told you. I returned to a scene of confusion. I lifted no window sash." Holmes opened the account book and ran a finger down its columns with a speed which would have done credit to a bank clerk. He did not look at the entries. He listened to them as a man might listen to a watch. "Curious," he said, tapping a line. "A subscription of 5 shillings every Thursday to the St. Brigid Friendly Society. Doubly curious that on alternate fortnights the hand which writes Brigid makes its G a crippled fellow, as if taught in a different school. Rafferty's school, perhaps. Lestrade, what say your men of a St. Brigid lodge in Tooke's Court?" Lestrade's eyebrows ascended. "We know it. It's no more saintly than my boot. A meeting room over the ironmonger's, half charity, half talk, half cards, and a good splash of whiskey. Why?" "Because we shall find Rafferty there tonight," Holmes answered. "And perhaps a name written on a slate which men think is a prayer." Miss Whitmore, who had stood very straight, allowed herself a single indrawn breath. "Mr. Holmes, if we find him, and if he speaks Mr. Hale's name—" "We shall not force what the facts will say for us," Holmes returned mildly. "For example, Mr. Hale, oblige me." He moved with the swiftness of a duellist, took Hale's right wrist, turned it delicately, and exposed above the immaculate cuff a healing graze as neat as a line drawn with a child's slate pencil. "Window liners bite when a man misjudges the swing. Yours bit you." "Yesterday." Hale freed himself with a controlled movement. "You presume, sir." "I observe," said Holmes, "and because I am not a judge, I had one more observation to the scales before they tip. The arson at dawn. A man who fears ledgers fears voices. Fire erases one. Fear stifles the other. Will you stifle yours, Mr. Hale?" For the first time, a crack, fine as a hair, traced Hale's poise. He looked not at Holmes, but at Miss Whitmore. "Clara," he said, and there was something almost paternal in the word. "Your uncle was a stern man. He would have destroyed this firm's work with his obstinacy. We were too deep to draw back. Clients expect—" "Honesty," she said very softly. The word hung. Holmes's tone became almost conversational. "Let us not anticipate the full confession. We are missing a note, the hand that holds the knife. You used Rafferty for years to shift figures. When Whitmore threatened exposure, a weapon appeared in a records room where your fingers would not dare. Who is your knife man? Not Rafferty. He plays with lines, not blades." Silence answered him. Then Lestrade's bundle, forgotten on the chair, found his lap again. He untied it. "We took this from the scorched room," he said, as if to change the subject, but his eyes were hard upon Hale. "A torn scrap from a delivery bill, fused to the wicker by heat. The carrier's stamp is Keegan and Son. They do little jobs. Their man-of-all-work is one Patrick Keegan, Rafferty's cousin by marriage." Holmes's fingers steepled. "Thus the wind acquires a name." Hale's resistance hardened, then sagged. He sank into the chair as though the springs had been removed. When he spoke, it was with the slow, terrible candour of a man who has calculated every sum but one. "If I speak," he muttered, "will the law show mercy?" "I am not the law," Holmes said, "but I have seen it temper its iron when a man spares it labour." Hale stared at the carpet. "I never meant murder, I swear it. The adjustments, small at first, kept us afloat in bad years. Whitmore would not bend, he would not listen. I told Rafferty to frighten him, to destroy vouchers, to make it seem as if—" He stopped, swallowed. "Keegan is a brute." He waited in the records room. Whitmore surprised him. The rest— God help me! Miss Whitmore's hand had gone to her mouth. Her eyes were dry, too wide for tears. Holmes stood at once, the decision taken. "Inspector, you have what you need. Arrest Mr. Hale on charges of conspiracy to defraud and accessory to murder. Send men to Keegan's rooms and to the St. Bridget Hall. As for Rafferty, he will not come willingly. He likes wires, darkness, and ladders. We will like lanterns better." Lestrade rose, grim and deficient now that the path lay straight. "You'll come quietly, sir," he said to Hale, and snapped the cuffs on with a soft finality. Holmes's hand fell gently upon Miss Whitmore's sleeve. "Courage," he murmured. "We have only rounded the first corner. The knife itself is still abroad, and men of Keegan's temper bite when hounded." He turned to me, all languor gone. "Watson, load your revolver fresh. Tonight we do not visit, we hunt. The web is singed, and the spider has fled to a darker beam. We must make the dark our ally." By the time twilight drew its veil over London, Holmes had gathered us once more into the fog-scented air, bound for Tooke's Court. The streets, damp from an afternoon drizzle, shone like strips of black glass under the gas lamps, and the clatter of wheels seemed muffled by the thickness of the mist. Miss Whitmore had been persuaded to remain at Baker Street under Mrs. Hudson's care, though her protest was spirited. Holmes had gently insisted. "The den we seek tonight is no place for courage of your kind," he told her, "but for iron and powder. Watson shall do admirably." We passed by the hulking outlines of warehouses until we reached a narrow alley where the sign of an ironmonger swung creaking in the evening wind. Above it, a faint glow of lamplight betrayed a room alive with voices. A cracked stairwell led upward. Holmes ascended without hesitation, pausing only to draw his cloak closer and whisper, "Follow my lead, Watson. Speak little, observe much." The room we entered was low-ceilinged, hot with pipe smoke, and heavy with the odour of spilled gin. Rough tables crowded its centre, at which sat men of every grade from porter to clerk. Some argued in hoarse whispers over cards, others leaned together in conspiratorial knots. A shelf bore the pious legend St. Bridget's Hall painted in faded gilt, though the only sanctity within was that of secrecy. At the far end, under a sputtering lamp, I glimpsed the unmistakable form of Rafferty, shoulders hunched, gold tooth glinting, a cigar stump between his fingers. He laughed low at something whispered by a companion, a big-jawed fellow with the look of a dock bruiser. Holmes touched my arm lightly and steered me to a vacant bench, where we ordered mugs we had no intention of drinking. He surveyed the hall with half-shut eyes, as though drowsy, yet I could feel the quick calculation at work behind them. "There sits Keegan," he murmured, tilting his head ever so slightly toward the brute beside Rafferty. "Our knife hand. Note his scar across the cheek. He has done jail time, though he carries himself with a workman's insolence rather than a thief's. Dangerous, Watson, very dangerous." We had not long to wait before Holmes made his move. He rose casually, mug in hand, and drifted toward the hearth where a blackboard hung with chalked figures, dues, meetings, and to my astonishment beneath the list, a series of names with sums against them. He studied it as though absent-mindedly, then, with the sudden air of a man recognizing an old acquaintance, he turned upon Rafferty. "Faith, you keep your books as carefully as Whitmore himself. said Holmes in a brogue so natural I scarce recognized it. "But the trouble with such neatness is that any man may read the names." "Why, here's one I know well enough. Hale. £10, regular as a church tithe." The effect was electric. Keegan half rose, hand darting to his belt. Rafferty's grin froze, then slid into a dangerous stillness. The room hushed in a heartbeat, as if the smoke itself had paused. Holmes, however, only leaned lazily against the mantel, mug dangling from his long fingers, his eyes shining with a dangerous amusement. "You speak freely, friend," Rafferty said at last, his tone silk with an edge of steel. "Perhaps too freely. And who might you be that knows names better than their writ?" Holmes let the silence stretch, then straightened, his disguise discarded in a flicker. "A man who follows ink where it leads," he said clearly, his natural voice ringing across the hall. "Sherlock Holmes at your service." Chaos erupted. Keegan lunged, the glint of steel in his fist. I fired instinctively, my revolver cracking. Above the din, the ball struck the table, splintering wood, and Keegan reeled back long enough for Holmes to whip a chair between them. Men shouted, scrambled, some for the door, others to hem us in. Rafferty did not move. He only watched, his gold tooth catching the lamplight as he smiled. Holmes's voice cut through the tumult like a whip. "Stand back! The yard is but 2 streets off, and Lestrade's men wait upon my signal. You may fight us, or you may run, and meet them head-on. Choose." The effect was not lost. Several of the rougher men bolted for the stair, colliding in their haste. Keegan, however, snarled like a trapped animal. "You'll not take me alive, curse you!" he roared, and came again, slashing wide. Holmes ducked with the agility of a fencer, and before I could fire a second shot, Rafferty moved at last. He caught Keegan's wrist with a serpent's swiftness and forced it down. "Easy, cousin," he said, his voice low yet carrying. "This one's not for slashing. Not here. Not now." Keegan panted, eyes bloodshot, then spat upon the floor. With a jerk, he wrenched free, but the fight had gone from him. He shoved the blade back into his belt and slumped onto the bench, chest heaving. Holmes regarded Rafferty with a cold precision. "Wise counsel, Rafferty, but wisdom too late. Hale has already named you both." For the first time, a flicker passed across Rafferty's mask. It was gone in an instant, replaced by his sly grin. "Hale names everyone when the rope shows. You think I fear his tongue? He'll sing no sweeter than Whitmore now." Holmes stepped closer, lowering his voice so that only we 3 might hear. "You mistake me. It is not Hale's tongue that condemns you, but his ledgers. We have them, every payment, every adjustment, every whispered instruction, yours among them. You are snared, Rafferty, and your cousin with you. The only choice left is whether you hang alone or whether you drag a dozen more with you." The room, once raucous, now simmered with uneasy silence. Men shifted, glancing at one another, waiting. Rafferty's grin faltered, then steadied. "If that's true," he said slowly, "then you've a bold game, Holmes, but games end when the board's overturned." And with that, he hurled his mug into the lamp. Glass shattered, flame leapt, and the room plunged into choking smoke. There was a rush of feet, curses, a crash of benches. Holmes seized my arm, dragging me toward the stair. Behind us, Keegan bellowed like a bull. I fired blindly into the air, and the mob parted just enough for us to break through. We stumbled into the fog-choked street, coughing, the hall behind us belching smoke and confusion. Holmes did not pause. He set off at a run, cloak streaming, his voice taut with urgency. "They'll scatter, Watson. Rafferty will slip to ground if we let him. Come, we must drive him toward the yard's net before the fog swallows him whole." And so we plunged after the shadow of the spider into the maze of alleys where London keeps her darkest secret. The smoke and uproar of St. Brigid's Hall had scarcely died behind us when we were swallowed by the labyrinth of alleys that veined Tooke's Court. Holmes darted ahead with that peculiar blend of grace and urgency that belonged to him alone, his figure a shadow barely distinguishable from the fog. I struggled to keep pace, revolver in hand, ears straining for the telltale scrape of boots. The fog played its tricks. Every echo seemed doubled. Every corner seemed alive with a fleeing phantom. "There!" Holmes cried suddenly, his keen ear catching what mine had not, a faint metallic jangle, the clink of steel against brick. We burst into a wider court where a figure had paused to haul a coil of wire from his shoulder. Even through the mist I recognized the broad-shouldered outline of Rafferty, his gold tooth gleaming as he glanced back. He vanished into a side passage before I could raise my weapon. Holmes did not falter. "Not toward the Strand, he is cleverer than that," Holmes called over his shoulder. "He'll turn inward, into the Warren, where the fog is his ally. Stay close, Watson, this game is not yet run." We pounded through passages so narrow our shoulders brushed the damp walls. Twice we stumbled over refuse heaps. Once I collided with a staggering drunkard who cursed and waved his bottle at me before disappearing into the night. Still Holmes pressed on, always certain, guided by clues invisible to me, the faint scuff of nailed boots upon stone, the faint taint of Trichinopoly smoke lingering where the air should have been clean. At last we emerged into a small yard hemmed in by decaying tenements. A broken lamp sputtered weakly above, casting a circle of sickly, yellow light. At the far end, Rafferty had paused, wire stretched between his hands. He meant to scale a wall and vanish into the upper windows. Keegan loomed behind him, panting, knife still glinting at his belt. Holmes raised his voice, cold and commanding. "Stand where you are, Rafferty. The yard has the exits netted. Resist, and you add gallows rope to your troubles." Rafferty laughed, though the sound rang hollow in the mist. "Holmes, is it? You chase shadows, and shadows slip your grasp. I've walked these lanes since I was a lad. You'll not pen me like Hale with his ledgers." Keegan growled like an animal, gripping his knife hilt. "Let me at 'em, cousin. A cut apiece and we're gone." But Rafferty's hand shot out, restraining him. His eyes, sharp as a rat's in the lamplight, never left Holmes. "No, knives make noise, wits make silence, and I'll trust mine against his." Holmes stepped forward, fearless, every line of his tall figure radiating authority. "Wits, Rafferty, yours have already betrayed you. The fibre from your wire is in my possession. The grease upon Hale's cuff matches your line. The very ash of your Trichinopoly litters Whitmore's office floor. Do you think a jury will call that shadow?" For the first time, Rafferty's grin faltered. He darted a glance at Keegan, whose face darkened with rage. "Then we'll see who speaks at all." Keegan snarled, and with a bellow he lunged. I fired, but the fog betrayed me. The ball smacked harmlessly into the wall. Holmes moved like lightning, striking the brute's wrist with his cane so that the blade clattered to the stones. A struggle followed, fierce and sudden, Keegan grappling like a maddened ox. Holmes ducked and twisted, but the man's sheer weight drove him back. Rafferty, rather than aiding his cousin, stooped to snatch the knife. His gold tooth flashed as he raised it, not against Holmes, but against me. I had no time to aim. Instinct alone saved me. I hurled myself sideways, the blade grazing my sleeve. My revolver butt, wielded like a club, cracked against Rafferty's temple. He reeled, swore, but did not fall. Holmes, locked with Keegan, shouted, "Watson, the wire!" I understood at once. The coil Rafferty had dropped lay across the stones. Seizing it, I swung it upward with both hands and flung it around Keegan's bull neck. Holmes, with a twist, used the brute's own momentum, and together we bore him crashing to the ground. The wire bit deep, not fatally, but enough to choke his fight from him. Rafferty, seeing his cousin subdued, faltered at last. He backed toward the wall, knife wavering. Holmes straightened, breathing hard, but his voice rang iron. "It is done, Rafferty. You may cut, you may run, but every lane is closed. Lestrade's men close the circle even now. Yield, and perhaps the rope may be stayed for your cooperation." The gold tooth gleamed once more. His eyes darted, calculating. Then, with a curse, he hurled the knife aside. "The rope or the cell, it's all one to a man who's fed the city's books his whole life. But don't think you've heard the last. London keeps its secrets deeper than any grave." Even as he spoke, the tramp of boots grew loud at the yard's entrance. Lestrade and half a dozen constables appeared, lanterns casting fierce light into the fog. At sight of the two men subdued, the inspector allowed himself a rare smile. "Well, Mr. Holmes, you've driven the rats from their nest. I'll have them snug in irons before dawn." Holmes stooped to retrieve the discarded knife, examining it briefly before passing it to Lestrade. "Keegan's weapon," he said, "and very likely the blade that ended Whitmore's life. You will find traces yet, fibres from the records room carpet, perhaps even the stain of his blood if your men search properly. It is evidence enough." Lestrade gave a sharp order, and Rafferty and Keegan were dragged away protesting. Silence fell upon the yard, broken only by the hiss of the fog about the lamps. Holmes turned to me, his face pale but triumphant. "You see, Watson, the alibi, woven from your name, was but one thread of a larger web. Now the spider and his knife are caught together." I holstered my revolver, my heart still pounding from the struggle. "And Hale?" I asked. "He shall face the courts for conspiracy, though Rafferty's ledgers will condemn him more surely than Hale's tongue. As for Downing, the boy will be cleared. He was but a pawn, and pawns are easily sacrificed." Holmes gazed into the fog, his profile stern and thoughtful. "Yet I tell you, Watson, this city breeds spiders faster than we can burn their webs. Today it was Hale and his Irish confederates. Tomorrow, another with smoother hands. Crime adapts, always." We left Tooke's Court behind, the noise of the arrest fading into the distance. As we walked back toward Baker Street, Holmes's stride was restless, his mind still turning. "There remains a detail," he said at last. "The note sent to Miss Whitmore, the warning in her hand, that was not Rafferty's work. He delights in traps, not cautions. Someone else feared for her safety, or sought to use her silence. Until I know which, I shall not call the case complete." And in that remark, uttered as the fog curled round us like an unfinished tale, I sensed that the mystery, though bloodied, was not yet fully laid to rest. The fog had scarcely lifted by the following morning when Holmes was already at work, pacing our sitting room with that restless tread which never ceased until his mind had fastened upon the last hidden link. The arrest of Rafferty and Keegan had relieved the city of two dangerous men, yet I could see plainly from Holmes's expression that his sense of finality was absent. He paused often at the window, fingers drumming against the sill, his gaze lost in the drifting traffic below. "It is unsatisfactory, Watson," he said abruptly. "All too neat. Hale, Rafferty, Keegan. Each has played his role, yet the piece does not end. There is a missing hand, one which wrote not in ledgers, but in warning. That note to Miss Whitmore, why should a man immersed in fraud and murder caution her to keep her pen idle? It was not self-preservation alone. There is a discordant instrument in this orchestra, and until I place it, the tune will not resolve." At that moment, Mrs. Hudson ushered in Inspector Lestrade, who looked both fatigued and elated. He carried under his arm a bundle of papers and nodded curtly before seating himself. "We've got Hale secure and the Irish pair as well," he reported. "They'll not see daylight for some time. The knife, as you predicted, matches stains found in the records room, and Keegan has half confessed in his fashion. As for Rafferty, he has kept his tongue, but his ledgers have not. They tally with Hale's payments to the farthing. I dare say the Yard will take the credit in print, but I shan't begrudge you the truth." Holmes inclined his head, but his lips pressed thin. "The truth, Lestrade, is seldom so. Obliging. Your ledgers and knife are fine, but they explain nothing of that warning to Miss Whitmore. Did your men trace the hand?" "We had the writing compared by our fellows," Lestrade replied. "Not Hale's, not Rafferty's, not Keegan's. Some woman's, perhaps, though roughened by trade. A mere curiosity." Holmes's eyes flashed. "Curiosities are the hinges of cases, Inspector. Dismiss them, and the door never opens." He turned sharply to me. "Watson, you recall Miss Whitmore's description. The note arrived an hour before her uncle's death. If the intention was to protect her, it succeeded, for she remained away from the office. Had she come, she might have witnessed the murder. But why should our villains spare a witness? No, it was not Rafferty's hand. Someone else moved in those shadows." I ventured a suggestion. "Perhaps a clerk in Whitmore and Hale's employ? One who knew of the plot and shrank from bloodshed?" Holmes stopped pacing. "Just so. A clerk, or a woman tied to the office in some capacity. That discoloured finger we observed in Miss Whitmore's own hand reminded me how the pen leaves its mark. There are others so marked. The Yard has secured the ledgers, yes, but not the hearts of those who copied them." Lestrade, impatient of conjecture, rose with a shake of his head. "If you find your phantom, Holmes, send word. I have jails enough filled with the flesh and blood villains." With that brusque farewell he departed, leaving a faint odour of damp wool and ink behind him. Holmes wasted no time. He summoned Miss Whitmore to Baker Street before noon. She arrived pale but composed, her mourning attire lending her a quiet dignity. Holmes greeted her with uncharacteristic gentleness, then placed before her the note once more. "Examine it again, Miss Whitmore. You said you were certain it was not your uncle's hand, nor Hale's, nor any clerk you could name. Look closely at the letters, particularly the R in returns. Do you see the spur at its base?" She leaned forward, brow furrowed. After a long moment she gasped. "Why, I have seen such a letter. It is the habit of Mrs. Tanner, our copying clerk. She assists in fair writing contracts and correspondence. She is a widow, poor but respectable, and has been with the firm for years. She has always been kind to me." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Exactly. A woman with access to papers, yet not high enough to profit by their alteration. She may have observed what Hale and Rafferty contrived, and in her conscience sought to shield you. Watson, we go at once to Mrs. Tanner." We found her lodgings in a modest street off Gray's Inn Road. A small, neat room bore evidence of careful poverty. A single geranium on the sill, books well thumbed but few, and a desk upon which lay quills and papers. Mrs. Tanner herself was a woman of middle years, with grave eyes and a face worn by labour and sorrow. When Holmes confronted her with the note, she at first denied, then, seeing the futility, bowed her head. "I wrote it," she confessed quietly. "I could not stand by. I had overheard Mr. Hale and that dreadful Irishman speaking in whispers near the records room. They thought me gone for the evening, but I had returned for my shawl. I heard enough to know that harm was meant for Mr. Whitmore. I feared Miss Clara would be drawn in, for her uncle often called her to assist. So I wrote the warning and sent it by a messenger boy. It was all I dared." Holmes regarded her with solemn respect. You showed rare courage, madam, though perilous discretion. Why did you not go to the police? She clasped her hands tightly. Because I have a son, Mr. Holmes. He is in service, and I feared that if my name were dragged into scandal, his place would be lost. Besides, I could not prove what I overheard. The law is hard upon the poor woman's word. Holmes nodded slowly. Yet you held the balance of the case in your hands. You may have saved Miss Whitmore's life. The Yard must hear your testimony, but I shall see that your son's situation does not suffer. Courage deserves no less. When we had taken our leave, Miss Whitmore's gratitude shone in her eyes, though it was tempered by grief. Holmes, however, walked in silence until we reached Baker Street. There he cast himself into his chair and steepled his fingers. You see, Watson, how the smallest hand writes the largest consequence. Without Mrs. Tanner's note, Clara Whitmore might have stood in that room at the very hour her uncle was slain. Hale would never have risked it, and events might have bent another way. Crime often founders not on the detective's brilliance, but on the conscience of some overlooked soul. I could not but agree, though I marvelled again at the depth of Holmes's insight. The case had widened beyond fraud and violence to embrace the quiet heroism of a humble clerk. Yet Holmes's gaze remained distant, fixed not upon the victory, but upon the lingering shadows. "There is one last knot, Watson," he said at last. "The money. Ledgers are but signs. Where the coin itself has gone, there lies the true spider's nest. Until I trace it, this case is not yet fully spun." And with that ominous reminder, he fell into silence, his eyes gleaming with the fire of thought, while outside, London's fog curled once more about Baker Street, concealing as much as it revealed. Holmes had scarcely allowed the ink of Mrs. Tanner's testimony to dry in his mind before he was again in motion. The following day dawned with a crisp wind from the river, sweeping some of the fog from the streets, but leaving the air sharp as a blade. I found Holmes bent over the fire with his pipe, his eyes remote, and his manner that peculiar stillness which in him preceded sudden action. "The ledgers give us the skeleton," he said at last, "but flesh is needed. Hale and Rafferty were middlemen. Watson, spiders of a low order. The real question remains, where has the stolen coin flown? A fraud is but a shadow until the money finds a purse. Track that purse, and we may glimpse the true architect." I confessed myself puzzled. "But surely the sums were dissipated, Holmes, siphoned into dozens of accounts, scattered among debts and pleasures?" "Not so," he replied sharply. "Hale had no taste for extravagance, Rafferty for none beyond his tobacco, and Keegan is brute, not banker. Yet the books show thousands, tens of thousands, bled away in whispers over years. The stream must have poured into a larger reservoir, and I think, Watson, that reservoir lies within the city's own financial heart." Before I could question further, a knock sounded and Lestrade entered, brisk and weary in equal measure. He carried a sealed packet. "We've traced some of the funds," said he without preamble. Our men followed the trail through the clearing banks. It seems payments went to a trading house on the river, Cotterell and Payne, commission merchants. Respectable enough on paper, but their books are as crooked as a corkscrew. I dare say they served as launders for Hale and his Irish friends. Holmes took the packet, slit it open, and scanned the contents. His lips curved in a cold smile. "Just as I suspected. Observe, Watson, repeated transfers under the guise of grain shipments and timber consignments, yet no such cargo ever arrived. The money was washed clean in fictitious trade. Lestrade, you've stumbled upon the sluice gate." Lestrade scowled. "If that's so, we'll raid Cotterell and Payne at once." Holmes raised a long hand. "Gently, Inspector. A premature raid, and the true master vanishes. Hale was no mastermind. He was but the bridge. The man we seek hides behind the merchant's facade, drawing profit from each vanished pound. Until we catch him with his hand upon the sluice, we grasp only smoke. Holmes spent the afternoon in silence, studying maps of the riverfront and making brief notes. As dusk fell, he rose with sudden energy. "Come, Watson, tonight we visit the docks. I have a fancy that our quarry will not sit idle while his channels are threatened. There is a certain warehouse near Billingsgate where Cotterell and Payne are said to store their shipments. Let us see what manner of shipments these are." The riverfront at night was a scene of grim majesty, hulking warehouses rising like black cliffs, the oily water lapping below, and the cries of sailors mingling with the groan of chains. We moved quietly along the wharves until Holmes halted before a low brick building with barred windows and a great sliding door. A solitary lamp burned within, throwing long shadows across the yard. Holmes crouched to examine the ground. "Two sets of prints," he murmured. "One heavy, perhaps a porter, the other lighter, more refined. Note the narrow sole and the steel tip. Our man of affairs pays visits here, though he does not sully his own hands." We crept closer, and through a crack in the door I glimpsed a curious scene. Bales and crates lay stacked, but many were empty shells, their lids loose. At a desk beneath the lamp sat a figure in a fine coat, writing swiftly upon a ledger. His features, when he turned, were clear, even at that distance. "Holmes," I whispered. "It is Mr. Percival Larch, the very client with whom Hale claimed to dine on the night of Whitmore's murder." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Exactly. The convenient alibi was no accident, Watson. Larch is the reservoir into which the river flowed. Hale dined with him, yes, but only to hand over the key to the sluice." Even as he spoke, the man rose, closing the ledger and slipping it into a satchel. At that instant, a door within the warehouse opened, and a porter entered, bearing a small chest. Larch inspected it, nodded, and produced a handful of banknotes. The chest was set upon the floor and covered with canvas. Holmes touched my arm. "We have seen enough, but we cannot act alone. There are too many exits. Come, we must fetch Lestrade and return at once." We withdrew silently and hastened back through the narrow lanes until we found a constable who carried our message to Lestrade. Within an hour, the inspector himself arrived with a squad of men, lanterns hooded and truncheons ready. Together we returned to the warehouse. But the lamp was extinguished, the satchel gone, the chest removed. The place was empty, but for the hollow crates and the smell of tobacco. Lestrade swore under his breath. Holmes moved swiftly to the desk, where the ink still glistened upon the surface. He bent low with his lens. "Fortune favours us, Inspector. See here, the impression of the last page remains upon the blotter. We shall have his record yet." With delicate care, he pressed a sheet upon the blotter and rubbed it gently. The ghost of Larch's entries rose clear. Sums, names, dates, and, most damning of all, the initials H.W. "Whitmore?" I breathed. "No, Watson, not Whitmore, but a cipher, Hale, and W for withdrawal." This was the account of the fraud itself, kept in Larch's private hand. Lestrade wasted no time. He dispatched men to Larch's home, but the bird had flown. Only servants remained, who swore their master had left in haste after receiving a letter. A cab was traced to the docks, where he had boarded a small steamer bound down river. Holmes's expression grew grim. "He flees to the continent. Once across the channel he will vanish amid his trading contacts. We must intercept him before the tide carries him beyond our reach." And so, before dawn's first light, we found ourselves again at the river, the chill wind cutting through cloak and coat alike. A cutter of the river police waited at the wharf, lanterns dimmed. Holmes stepped aboard with the air of a commander who already heard the enemy's sails. "Come, Watson," he said, his eyes alight with that fierce joy which only the chase awakened in him. "Tonight we hunt not spiders in their webs, but the spider's master as he scurries to sea. This case draws to its close, and the last knot lies waiting upon the tide." The night upon the Thames was black and restless, the tide running swift with the wind against it, so that the river seemed alive with whispering voices. Lanterns bobbed faintly from distant barges, and the hulking outlines of warehouses loomed like slumbering beasts along the shore. I shivered as our cutter nosed downriver, the chill dampness creeping through my coat. Holmes stood in the bow, tall and motionless, his eyes fixed ahead, as if he could pierce the darkness by sheer force of will. Lestrade, wrapped to the chin in his greatcoat, muttered beside me. "The steamer took the tide half an hour before you roused me. She'll have passed Greenwich by now. If we do not overhaul her before Gravesend, she's clear away." "Patience, Inspector," Holmes replied without turning. "Our quarry is burdened, not swift. He carries ledgers and coin heavier than ballast, and such cargo makes men careless. He believes the river his friend. He will learn it is mine also." The crew bent to their oars, the cutter slicing through the dark water. Twice we passed lumbering barges, their watchmen staring at us with bleary curiosity. Once, near Deptford, Holmes raised his hand sharply. "Listen." Over the lap of the tide came the muffled chug of an engine ahead. The men pulled harder, and soon the shadow of a small steamer emerged, a dim light glowing at her stern. "There she is," Lestrade breathed. "The Artemis, hired out of Limehouse. If Larch is aboard, we've caught him yet." Holmes crouched, speaking rapidly to the sergeant in charge of the men. "Steer wide, then cut in close at her quarter. No light, no hail. Watson, keep your revolver ready. Lestrade, when I give the word, we board." The cutter swept nearer, the splash of oars muffled by the river's own noise. I saw the steamer's deck, deserted save for one sailor at the tiller. Holmes leapt first, landing cat-like upon the planks. I followed clumsily, Lestrade and two constables close behind. At once a cry went up from below, and figures burst from the companionway. 3 sailors and a man in a long coat, clutching a satchel tight to his breast. By the weak light, I recognized him instantly. "Percival Larch!" Holmes's voice rang like steel. "You will not escape!" The man's eyes darted, his face pallid, yet resolute. "Stand aside, Holmes," he cried. "This is no concern of yours. The money is mine by right. I built the channels, I risked the law. Whitmore was a fool who would have ruined us all." "Theft is no right," Holmes returned. "And murder no channel." At that word, Larch's composure cracked. "I did not kill him. It was Keegan's hand, not mine. I—"
"Never meant blood, only profit. Yet you profited from blood," Holmes said coldly. "And that stains deeper than any ink. The sailors, perhaps bribed or merely loyal, rushed us with belaying pins. The deck became a chaos of blows and cries. I fired once above their heads, the crack startling them but not halting their rush. Lestrade and his men grappled fiercely, truncheons against wood. Holmes, meanwhile, closed upon Larch, who tried to force past him to the rail. The satchel swung like a shield, but Holmes struck it aside with his cane, sending it spilling across the deck. Gold sovereigns and papers scattered, glinting in the lantern light. Larch gave a strangled cry and dived after them, but Holmes was upon him, his long arms pinning him to the boards. The struggle was brief. Soon Larch lay gasping, wrists clamped in Lestrade's irons. The sailors, seeing their master subdued, yielded sullenly. The deck quieted save for the lap of water against the hull and the ragged breathing of men spent with exertion. Holmes straightened, brushing dust from his coat, his eyes alight with grim satisfaction. Inspector, your net is closed. You have the architect as well as the masons. Lestrade kicked the satchel shut, his expression a mixture of triumph and exhaustion. By heaven, Holmes, you've done it again. The yard will ring with this before morning. Larch, Hale, Rafferty, Keegan, all tied together. It's a nest I'd never have smoked out without you. Holmes inclined his head, but his gaze lingered on Larch with a strange pity. Here lies a man who mistook cleverness for wisdom. He built bridges of fraud across honest men's ledgers, and when one stone resisted, he called for the knife. Whitmore stood, and he fell. So it is always. The steamer was turned back upriver under guard, the cutter lashed alongside. As we glided through the mist once more, I felt the tension ebb, leaving only weariness in its place. Holmes stood apart, silent, watching the scattered lights of the city reappear. At last he spoke softly to me. You see, Watson, how fragile are the walls of trust upon which commerce rests. A clerk alters a figure, a partner winks at it, a merchant launders the sum, and the whole edifice totters. Whitmore alone would not bend, and so the straightest beam was struck down. It is ever thus. Honesty is murdered, that dishonesty may thrive a day longer. I could not but agree, though my heart was heavy for Miss Whitmore, whose uncle had paid with his life. At least she may find some peace, I said. The villains are unmasked, their schemes undone. Holmes looked at me keenly, his features softened by the lantern's glow. Peace, perhaps. But she has seen how close ruin lurks even in the ledgers of law. That knowledge is a shadow few can wholly banish. Still she is strong, and Mrs. Tanner will stand by her. The firm, though scarred, may yet endure. Dawn was breaking as we reached the wharf,
where constables waited to march Larch away. The first light gilded the river, turning its dark waters to fleeting silver. Holmes watched the prisoner led off, then turned to me with a weary smile. Another web torn down, Watson? Yet the city breeds them endlessly. Still, it is something to have freed one corner from the spider's clutch. We walked slowly back to Baker Street, the streets stirring to life around us. Holmes was unusually quiet, his thoughts still turning upon the case. Only as we climbed the familiar stairs did he speak again. You know, Watson, what interests me most in this affair is not Hale's cowardice, nor Rafferty's cunning, nor even Larch's ambition. It is the note, Mrs. Tanner's single act of conscience. That frail hand, guided only by decency, altered the course of events more surely than all our deductions. Remember that, my friend. It is not always the keenest mind that saves a life, but often the simplest heart. I wrote those words later in my notes, struck by their uncharacteristic gentleness. For all his brilliance, Holmes seldom allowed sentiment to show. Yet in that moment I glimpsed the man behind the mind, and I marvelled at the humanity hidden beneath his relentless logic. Thus ended the case of the forgotten file, with justice wrested from fraud and blood, and with the lesson, as ever, that London's darkness may conceal both villainy and virtue. Holmes, for his part, soon turned to another matter, dismissing his triumph with a shrug and a wry remark upon the fallibility of bankers. But for me the memory lingered, of fog and fire, of ledgers and lies, and of the indomitable figure of Sherlock Holmes striding through the city's shadows to bring them, if only for a moment, into the light. The matter reached its conclusion some days later, when the courts had committed Hale, Rafferty, Keegan, and at last Larch himself for trial. The evidence, Mrs. Tanner's testimony, the ledgers seized from the warehouse, and the damning accounts impressed upon the blotters, was overwhelming. Even the most adroit counsel could not untangle so many strands of guilt. Miss Whitmore, though bowed by grief, bore herself with a dignity that impressed all who saw her, and she expressed her gratitude to Holmes in words whose simple warmth even he could not brush aside with his usual irony. Downing, the trembling clerk who had been ensnared by Rafferty's plots, was quietly released from custody. I had the satisfaction of shaking his hand when he came to Baker Street to express his thanks. Holmes dismissed him with a brusque nod, though when the young man had gone I caught a rare smile flicker across my friend's lips. "He will do well enough," Holmes said. "Fear teaches some men prudence. It may yet make an honest clerk of him." As for Mrs. Tanner, her courage at last received the recognition it deserved. The Yard, urged by Holmes, ensured her son's place was secured, and she returned to her humble duties with the knowledge that her small act of conscience had preserved a young woman from grave peril. I have seldom seen Holmes speak with more respect of any witness than he did of her, and I suspect that in his own austere way he admired her quiet bravery more than the ingenuity of the crime he had unmasked. One evening, when the newspapers had at last laid the case to rest, I found Holmes by the fire, his violin upon his knee. He had drawn from it a low, contemplative strain, more thoughtful than mournful, when he suddenly ceased and turned to me. "You see, Watson, how the simplest distortion, the alteration of a single date in a file, may serve as the first pebble to start an avalanche. A partner slain, a firm imperilled, fortunes shifted, lives undone, all from the stroke of a pen." "You showed, Holmes," I replied, "that even the most cunningly woven web cannot endure against relentless logic." He smiled faintly, his gaze drifting to the fire. "Logic, perhaps, but also conscience. Remember, it was not my deductions alone that turned the case, but Mrs. Tanner's warning. It is a humbling thought, Watson, that the fate of men of intellect and power was shaped by the tremulous hand of a poor clerk who dared to act." There was silence between us for a time, broken only by the crackle of the coals. At length he added, with that familiar mixture of pride and detachment, "Still, it was a neat case, full of false leads, hidden motives, and the satisfaction of truth wrested from shadows. I shall not regret its place among our files." And so ended the adventure of the forgotten file, in which honesty contended with cunning, and in which Holmes once more proved that crime, however artfully contrived, must ever reckon with the watchful eye and unerring reason of Sherlock Holmes. For my part, I could not but reflect, as I set down these notes, that I had been privileged once more to stand at the side of the greatest detective of our age, whose brilliance illuminated not only the hidden guilt of men, but also the quiet virtues too easily overlooked in the vast and shadowed city we called our home.